myself. I'm CoreyPine, CoreyPine Shane. CoreyPine's my first name. I'm the director of the Blue Ridge School of Herbal Medicine in Barnardsville, just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. But I think the plants in Tennessee are very similar to the plants in North Carolina. I mean, where I'm up in the mountains, very similar to both the mountainous region of East Tennessee, kind of like from the Great Smokies to Knoxville, but then also the Ridge and Valley, which is like the next section over, which kind of goes to about, kind of like Chattanooga would be like the southern edge of that. And kind of like somewhere halfway between like Knoxville and Nashville, the beginning of the Cumberland Plateau there. Plug my computer in here. So excited to see you all here, and I apologize for being late. It's been quite a long few days, but that's a different story. And I'm excited. I'm really excited to talk to you all about the native plants of Tennessee, and also it's a good reminder. I thank you, Karen, for mentioning that the Wildflowers of Tennessee it's a book that was
yes,
from your organization.
Yes, we created it.
I adore that book. It's like one of the Wildflowers of Tennessee, the Southern Appalachians, and the Ohio Valley. I think I said that in the wrong order.
Ohio Valley and Southern Appalachians. Yep.
That's it. That's the right.
And Dennis Horn, I'm surprised he's not on. He's the lead author, is usually at these meetings.
Wow, that is I highly recommend that book to you all. It's one of my favorite books for plant ID in my area. One of the things I like about it is it's organized by plant family. So if you know a little bit about botany, and you could like look at a plant to be like, oh, that's a rose family plant, or that's a buttercup family. You can turn to those pages and look things up there. And the authors also include a lot of information about ethnobotanical type information about possible edibility or possible medicinal or the traditional or historical medicinal uses of the plant, which I find really fascinating. And sometimes I even learn, even though I've been in practice and teaching for years, sometimes I still learn stuff from those little tidbits at the end of each plant.
One other little advantage the book has is that in the front it has a cheat sheet, is what I call it. It's all these pictures by color. So if you're hiking and you come across a beautiful red flower and you have no clue what it is, if you look under the red flowers, you can look at all these little photos and see if you can find something that's similar. And go to that, and then that will lead you on the trail usually to your plant, if it's not it actually. So
that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so it's good for first timers as well as people who are fair botanists. So
good call. And the pictures are amazing, and they really show you the part of the plant that will help you identify the plant too. And sometimes it's easier than, like, let's say Newcomb's Wildflower Guide, which I also really like. But those are line drawings, and sometimes that's easier, but sometimes it's not you don't get as much of a sense of a plant from the line drawing. Sorry, I'm just laughing because I just looked out there and I saw a large insect, and then all of a sudden I saw a Phoebe come and swoop up the insect and fly away. I love living it right out in nature. So
yes. Well, welcome, CoreyPine, and we're glad you're here. And you're doing a better job of introducing yourself than I could do. So please continue and go into your talk as you wish.
Sounds great. And I see that someone posted the link to the Wildflowers of Tennessee book there, in the chat there. Let's see. Oh yeah, and I've it's funny. I actually went to herbal school. I studied herbal medicine in upstate New York back in the early '90s, and I moved to the Asheville area in 1996. So before it was cool. And now it's like New York Times travel list. It's really funny to me. But it's also a beautiful place, so I also understand it. And I've been teaching classes. I started my herb school, the Blue Ridge School of Herbal Medicine, in 1999. I've been wildcrafting, harvesting plants from the wild, growing some plants, buying from local organic farms, and making my own medicines, making my own herbal extracts and selling those. I'm saying all this because that's the knowledge that informed me writing this book. I'm actually a practitioner. I see clients, I help people with health conditions. So I have a knowledge of both what the plants look like in the wild, how to identify them, what things look similar to each other. There's several different plants that look like black cohosh, so goat's beard, and then also false goat's beard, which is, if I get this in the right order, Aruncus and Astilbe, the respective genus genera. So I might have that actually reversed. But so it's good to know, like, oh, how do you know that that's actually black cohosh? Even if it's something you're just identifying, if you just want to know and like be knowledgeable of like, oh, that plant there is black cohosh and that plant there is not. I want to say this too, speaking to like a native plant group, that I find myself more and more teaching people about how to, I talk more and more about ethical and sustainable wildcrafting. I mean, I always have, but I find that more and more people are into wildcrafting, harvesting plants from the woods. And so it becomes this thing of like, okay, how do we all get medicine from the woods, or how do we all get medicine from the wild without, as herbal medicine gets more and more popular, without damaging the native plant stands? And there's some plants that I've talked about in the past that I no longer teach because I don't think there's enough out there to be sustainable to harvest. I mean, maybe if I was just harvesting, or, you know, there's a few of us, but as more and more people learn herbal medicine, we have to be careful what we're harvesting, because the impact on the wild is multiplied. So these are some of the things that I talk about in my book as well. Also informs my teaching, informs my writing. I wrote this book, I'll show it off here. This is a Southeast Medicinal Plants by Timber Press, subtitled Identify, Harvest, and Use 106 Medicinal Plants, 106 Wild Herbs for Health and Wellness. So one of the things that I did too is, like, as I was writing this book, as I was writing this book, I also made sure to include a lot of non-native plants. But since it's a native plant society, I'll focus on the native plants today, and include a lot of plants that are really abundant. And so I want to just start off by pointing out, although I think this is in my slideshow, maybe I should start my slideshow. I want to point out too that that there's a lot of really abundant plants that can be used for medicine, things that we often think of as weeds, like Japanese knotweed is a medicinal plant, and it's an exotic invasive. Mimosa tree, Albizia julibrissin, great medicinal. Burdock, dandelion, chickweed, violets, things that a lot of people think of as like these like awful, terrible, invasive things are incredibly useful for medicine. So let's see, okay, go ahead and share my screen here. So calling this talk Appalachian Herbs, History and Sustainable Use. Just because I'm from Appalachia, so it's a bit of the focus, but I also chose plants that are outside of the Appalachians as well. These are not plants that are only Appalachian. Trying to keep an eye on the chat box here.
We'll take care of the chat box for you. Don't worry about that, okay?
Okay.
What we'll do is hold the questions until the end, and then we'll, Bettina and I will feed them to you. How's that?
That's perfect. And Karen, I'm trying to like identify the plant that's in your background.
It's a native.
These look like a geranium, but the flowers look different.
I think that's my wild petunias.
Oh, ooh. Yeah,
I do have,
those.
maybe it is the geraniums. I'm not sure. I've got both. The petunias are blooming right now. The geraniums are finished.
Oh, yeah.
And these pictures are from last year. So.
Gotcha.
And Bettina has, it looks like Storardia. Is that correct? Which is a tree.
Yes, wild camellia.
Yes. Oh, nice. Oh, that's interesting. Like in North Carolina, think about that as more of a coastal plant. But where does that grow in Tennessee?
Uh, isn't that,
Cumberland Plateau and I've seen it in the Smokies as well,
Oh, okay.
in the tea family.
Oh, nice. Cool. Thank you. I just have like my house as a background. I'm gonna jump ahead to the plants here. Let's talk about plants. So um, both North Carolina, Tennessee, because y'all are in Tennessee, long history of use of herbal medicine. I could jump back to that slide just for a minute here and say that this area, we weren't glaciated, unlike Ohio North, like you cross the Ohio River and all of a sudden the vegetation really changes. Because we weren't glaciated, we have a much greater diversity of, do you know what I mean by glaciated? Because we weren't like run over by glaciers in the past few ice ages, a lot of plants from the north migrated south. And then as the glaciers retreated, they stayed at higher elevation. Tennessee has this great diversity of altitude, rainfall, geology. And I think that actually the Wildflowers of Tennessee book does a great job of introducing the different physiographic regions of Tennessee, from in the east where you have like the Appalachian Mountain to the Ridge and Valley, Cumberland Plateau, intercoastal plain, and then the coastal plain, like along the Mississippi River there, and Memphis, and Elvis. Speaking as someone who's actually been to Graceland, yes. And also we have a very rich tradition. So up here in the mountains, we have the Cherokee. Sagali is kind of the more Cherokee name for the Cherokee. And then further to the west, like more, I'm not 100%, don't quote me on this, but from my understanding, the Cherokee were kind of more the, in the mountains, maybe somewhat into like the Ridge and Valley and also like North Georgia and even like maybe a little bit of North Alabama. But as we get further west, like Cumberland Plateau, North Alabama, we had the Creek and the Muskogee. And some books talk about them as they're two different tribes, but doing some research, it looked like it was just two different names for the same tribe. And if you have a comment on that, if you know more than me, please put that in the chat. I might be wrong there. And also because as the European American settlers got further away from the coast, we got further away from resources, and then going over the mountains, it was hard to get medicine up over the mountains and off to Tennessee. And so we had to be a bit more dependent. We couldn't, the settlers couldn't be always running to hospitals every time. And so it means that people had to like know more about the plants around them and how to use them for food, for medicine, for making baskets, for like all the many, many ways that we use plants. I focus on the medicinal use, but so many ways we use plants. So having said that, like a short introduction to this topic, I'm going to jump in with pleursy root. Often the herbalists call this plant pleursy root. The botanists often call it more butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. So if you're familiar with your Latin names, or if you can like look at that, the shape of that flower, you'll recognize this as a milkweed. It's an unusual milkweed for two reasons. First off, it's not opposite. Every milkweed, every other Asclepias I could think of has opposite leaves. This has alternate leaves. And the second thing is that it does not milk. It is a, I guess it's dairy-free, it must be like a dairy-free milkweed. So it's a non-milk milkweed. It's lactose intolerant or something, I don't know. As you can see from this photo, it is an amazing pollinator attractor. So it's very commonly planted, pretty easy to grow from seed. And it has a big root, tuber that goes down. I find it fairly common. It's somewhat, I see it up here in the mountains, just along roadsides. I've seen it like along the side of like I-26 and I-40. if I'm like paying attention to what's on the roadside instead of to traffic, not always the smartest idea, but there's so much fun stuff happening just even on these big highways. So, but I do see this like somewhat commonly up in the mountains, but it's much more common when you drop down into like the lower elevations. Like in North Carolina, I see it more commonly in the Piedmont than I do in the mountains. And in Tennessee, I see it more as you come, and it exists in like the Smokies and Appalachian, but as you come down, into like the Ridge and Valley and then into the Cumberland Plateau, this becomes more common. So I would say probably more common in the mid-state. I haven't explored botanically as much of the western part of the state, so I can't speak as much to that. But I have seen it. I remember seeing a lot of it as I was driving west on I-40 through like Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas. So I assume if it grows out there, it probably also grows in the western part of Tennessee. And if not, you can easily plant this and grow it. It's one of those plants that people often plant as like, if you get a packet of seeds as like a pollinator seed packet, this often is like one of the herbs that's one of the plants that's in there. And the medicinal use of this, so this is a native plant, and I chose this one because even though it is native, I feel like it is abundant enough to use to harvest when you see enough of it. It's a challenging one to harvest because it likes to grow in really tough soil and it's very like soft root. Unfortunately, the upper parts of the plant are toxic to humans. We don't use the leaves for anything. And even though some milkweed species, especially Asclepias syriaca, common milkweed, the flower buds are edible and the young pods, that's not true of all milkweeds, and some are toxic. This, unfortunately, is one of the toxic ones. It is not edible. And probably pretty bitter anyhow. But the root is used for medicine. The root is used for medicine, and it's called pleurisy root because it was used for the medical condition called pleurisy. Which ironically is an inflammation of the lungs. And right now I seem to be having a little trouble with that. Ironic.
Sorry, that's why I laughed.
Totally understandable. Yes. So pleurisy is
you planned that.
No. It's just, yeah, synchronicity. My cat might be joining us at some point. So pleurisy root is used for pleurisy. Pleurisy is an inflammation of the lining of the lungs. Pleurisy is kind of an older word. The modern medical word would be pleuritis, which literally means inflammation of the pleura. And often what this looks like is when it's not really a disease in and of itself. It's when people get pain. They get to a point in like a bronchitis or pneumonia, lung infection, where they cough, and when they cough, it's painful. Or taking a deep breath is a little bit painful. It's hard for like as the line of the lungs is inflamed, it kind of pushes up against the inside of the chest cavity. So as you breathe in, it's like it hurts a little bit. And so that's how you know that someone has pleurisy. And this herb is good for that. But I think what I most commonly use this plant for, I actually tend to use it like after a lung issue. I mean, sometimes when someone has an active infection, but it's not antimicrobial, it's not going to, cure anything. It more like moves fluids around in the body. So I use it for like when people have excess fluid in the lungs. And I use it when there's after an illness, that could be even like during like a bronchitis or pneumonia, people just have like too much fluid in the lungs. It helps kind of dry that out. But it's also good for when people have finished up with an illness and they feel like really like have a dry throat, dry lungs, but they still have mucus like really like deep down in their lungs. They're kind of like doing the and you just can't get it out. Pleurisy root, really good one for that. So I use it for like the after effects of of, bronchitis, pneumonia, where it's like it's really good to get that out, because if that phlegm stays in there, that can create some difficulty breathing, difficulty getting like a really deep breath in there. And also it creates this imbalance where that fluid just stays in there. You can create an environment where then bacteria, virus, and especially possibly fungi have an easier time taking root deep in the lungs. So one of the things that made me think about this, I'm going to grab a book here. I bought this book a while ago, but it's a book by Kathy Abascal called Herbs and Influenza. And it's a book that she wrote after SARS, I believe. There's SARS or the bird flu, like about 10 years ago, there's all this worry about a viral pandemic. And she did research about what herbs were actually used during the 1918 influenza pandemic. So I thought in March of 2020, I was like, I wonder who I should call about this new like coronavirus thing I keep hearing about. So I called up Kathy. Good, she's a friend of mine. But this is the book, Kathy. She wrote a new edition. She just updated a little bit in March of 2020. And so we talked for a while. She gave me some great advice. And I said, thank you. Is there anything I can get you? Anything that you need? And she's like, yeah. Send me about as much pleurisy root as you can. Send me like 32 ounces of pleurisy root. So I had some. I shipped it out to her. There we go. Actually, you can see the pleurisy root is actually in the back cover of her book. And I'm supposed to be here talking about my own book, but this book is also very good. It is a bit more oriented towards herbalists, but it does have some great information if you want to learn more about herbs that are antiviral. It's got some great info in there. And it's written from a combination of someone who's both a practicing herbalist, but also is very research-based. So it talks a lot about historical uses and then what science says about those historical uses, like what's been shown to like play out in the test tubes. But she also talks about herbs that were used and were found useful, but not necessarily scientifically backed. So it's not just science. So kind of like, oh, right, yes. I know you said you'd monitor the chat, but I'm just gonna like type this in. Used to like doing the, I'll send it to you. So I'm used to doing monitoring chat boxes because I've been teaching a lot on Zoom, as you might imagine.
Yes.
This is available. What's that? Yeah, especially, there you go. So the name of the book and the author is in the chat box there. So now I'm going to turn the chat box off again and I can handle that. But I thought someone might have a question about that. So yeah, herbs and influenza. It's not going to tell you like this is how to cure COVID, but here are some helpful herbs that could be potentially useful. So pleurisy root is one that I've been using. And again, it's not antiviral. It doesn't kill viruses. It doesn't kill cells that are infected with a virus. What it does is it changes the internal environment. So as a holistic herbalist, when someone is sick, I'm looking at not just, if someone is sick with a bacterial infection, I'm not just going to try to kill the bacteria. If someone is, even if someone is sick with cancer, I'm not just giving herbs to kill cancer cells. I'm thinking like, okay, how is the body healthy? How is it unhealthy? And how can we create a state of better health? Let me put this a different way, because you all are plant people. Think about it when you're working in your garden. If you garden, sometimes I'll see a plant that'll be like, it'll be a little bit yellow, and I'm like, oh, am I watering this plant too little? Am I watering it too much? Is there a deficiency in the soil? Do I need to like talking with someone else, and they said like, oh, you really need to like put coffee grounds on your cucumbers because they're, what is that, nitrogen deficient? The leaves were a little bit on the yellow side, and she's like, oh, there's nitrogen deficiency, I believe is nitrogen. You need to put coffee grounds on that. So what I was doing there wasn't treating the yellow leaves. I was working on the soil, working on the environment to give the plant the correct nutrients that it needed. Hey, stop that. Sorry. My cat is scratching on something she shouldn't be scratching on because she knows that'll get my attention. But basically, that's the way of a holistic herbalist. We're not just attacking the thing, we're also nourishing the soil. So you think about maybe like with tomato plants, you know, it's really hard to stop a tomato plant that has the blight. Once it has the blight, I mean, you can pick them off, but we're not trying to kill the blight. What I do is I try to, like, you know, mulch my tomatoes, make sure that they don't stay wet, make sure that soil isn't splashing up in the bottom of the leaves. You do things to create a better environment for that tomato plant so they don't get the blight in the first place. So that's what I think about with something like Pleurzy root. It's not going to like work directly on the virus, but it'll make a healthier environment for the human. So yeah, I'm going to move on to the next herb. But any questions about Pleurzy root? Or I could just take questions at the end. That's also another way to do this. Yeah. Okay. Karen, could you remind me, like, what's our time here? Like, how?
You can go until, oh goodness, 7:30, 7:40.
Oh, great. Cool. Sounds good. Forgot you're on Central Time too, so that threw me for a minute. But yes, I'm on Eastern Time. Great. Yeah, I started late, so I'll go a little bit late. If you need to drop out early, don't worry about it. I won't be offended. And I believe this is being recorded. Is this being recorded?
Yes, it is being recorded, and the recording will be available by the end of the week on our Tennessee Native Plant Society website. So
Fantastic.
anyone who misses or has to leave early, you'll have the opportunity to check it out later.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you for that. And this is elder. For our next plant, elderflower on the left, elderberry on the right. Same plant, Sambucus canadensis. Did a little bit of research because there's some controversy about that botanical name. Some people are like, oh, it's Sambucus nigra, variety canadensis. But as far as I can tell, that's still controversial. It's still officially Sambucus canadensis until it gets changed. Seems to be what I was finding when I researched botanical names. Started using them because they like, oops, sorry, tap the screen there. But yeah, so this is the native elder, but it is very closely related to the elder in Europe. And so a lot of the medicinal use of this plant, a lot of times when we learn about a native plant and how it was used, it's because of the Native Americans were using it. That's why I started off talking about the Cherokee and the Creek Muskogee, because they were the Native Americans in this area. So if you want to know like why like a white guy like me knows about Pleurzy root, it's because, you know, like a Cherokee person probably told one of my ancestors and somebody wrote it down. But elder is one we know both from like local tradition and also from the European tradition. So a lot of the research was actually done on the European plant, but the chemistry of the Sambucus canadensis, the American species, and the European species, the Sambucus nigra, shows that the constituents are like almost identical and can be used very similarly. One difference I noticed from, you know, I've only been in Europe twice, but one of the differences I noticed was that the Sambucus nigra can get to be huge. I saw one that was like 30 feet high and just bushy and healthy. Of course, that's in Ireland. It rains a lot in Ireland. Eating my licorice candy to keep my voice supple and smooth. So this is known more as an antiviral plant. And probably elderberry is what's most commonly used these days. I wonder if many of you might have heard of elderberry syrup. Something you can easily get at like Whole Foods, natural food stores around. at least in Asheville, I also see it a lot at farmers markets. It's commonly used. Easy to make. The thing to note about the elderberries, actually all parts of elder can contain some cyanogenic compounds. In other words, if you eat them raw, they're a little bit toxic, but it's okay because your body recognizes them as toxic and so it gets rid of them very quickly. In other words, what I mean by that is if you eat a bunch of raw elderberries, either fresh or dried, it will quickly leave your body either up through emesis or downward through diarrhea. So my suggestion is not to do that unless that's the medicinal action that you really want. There's times to do that. There's times when you really want to get something out of your body. But if you're using this for medicine, you want to cook it. And that's why you can either like pour hot water over and that heat will denature those cyanogenic compounds. Chemistry piece is not important. The just idea is that there's stuff in there that our body recognizes as toxic and will scoot out of the body. Heat changes that. Heat changes that chemistry and makes it edible. So that's why we cook the elderberries in water. We can like cook them, we simmer them for at least 20 minutes to make the syrup, and then we can eat the berries. Or we can make tea from the flowers or the berries. The stems are a little bit stronger. So usually I pick off most of the stem. The individual, I know some people who will like pick off like every itty bitty little pedestal of every little flower. And I just think that's overkill. I mean, there's just so little, I don't think it's a big deal, but at least usually the way I harvest them is I'll get my basket and I'll harvest the whole umbel. Harvest that whole umbel of either flower or berry. The flowers are up right now. Beautiful plant. I see just growing. I mean, it's literally just growing along the creek on the side of my road here. And it blooms for a long time. I mean, I feel like it starts blooming late May through early July, like in my area. And then if you go to different elevations, you probably see it even changing, you know. I love elevation that way. You can kind of like, and also latitude. You get to see different things blooming at different times. You get into Florida, I've seen elderflowers, Sambucus canadensis, blooming in October. So a little unusual. Down there, you know, the seasons start to mean a little bit less when you get down to Florida. Things change a bit more. But our latitude tends to flower well, sometimes if you're at lower elevation, could be as early as mid-May, and then probably as late as like early to mid-July, I would say. And sometimes I've even seen like in the same week, when you get to July, some of those early flowers have already gone to berry, and then the berries stick around through September because the birds love this. Most of my friends who grow elderberry, they'll be watching them and they'll be like, oh, 2 more days before I can harvest, 1 more day before it's ripe. And they go out that morning that it's ripe and it's covered in birds and all the berries are gone. And you have a whole bunch of happy birds and no elderberries to make medicine from. So some people will net them, like throw a net over the elderberries before they're ripe. Growing in the wild, that's less common. But if you have a whole bunch of elderberries growing together, the birds can see that a bit more easily. Traditionally, actually, elderflower was used much more often. And elderberry is a bit more recent. Like I think it's more commonly used in the past 20, 30 years. Elderberry has become predominant. So cooking it into a syrup makes it much tastier. Great way if you have kids to get your kids to take like immune herbs. Like, oh, you're feeling a little sick. Like I had a friend whose kids would not take any herbal medicine. And she'd be like, oh, well, there's a cold going around your school, so we're going to have pancakes for breakfast. And here's some lovely purple syrup to put on it. So, you know, kind of like tricking the kids a little bit. Or what I used to do with my stepson is we would get soda water and put a tablespoon or 2 of elderberry syrup into the soda water. You know, just plain soda water. It's like the Polar Seltzer. That's one brand, but you know, there's other brands out there. I'm just saying. It's like nothing fancy, nothing like, you know, you don't have to use LaCroix. You can just, like flavored waters, just get like soda water, pour a glass full of it, depending upon how sweet you want it or how medicinal, put like 1 or 2 tablespoons in there. And because to make a syrup, you've added either sugar or honey, it's already sweetened and it makes a delicious soda. And if you don't want to buy, commercial soda for your kids, it's just a great way to make a healthy drink that also fulfills their desire to like be cool and have sodas. I actually make my own soda from elderflower. Didn't have time to make it this week. I was going to, it's too bad. I could have showed it off to you. And it just would look like bubbly water. So maybe it's good that I didn't. But I clipped the elderflowers and I pour boiling water over them. And oh, wait. I don't have the exact recipe, but if you're interested during the Q&A session, I can look it up. The basic is, you can look up how to make an herbal soda. But I bring sugar and water to a boil so that until the sugar dissolves. Cut the heat, pour that sugar water over the elder into like an open jar, and then cover it with a cheesecloth. But so it's still open to the air, but bugs can't get in. Or you can just put like a linen cloth over there, just something to keep the bugs out. But you need the air to come in to like, and also you need the carbon dioxide to escape. And it'll start working. It'll start fermenting a little bit. And after like 2 or 3 days, you have a soda. You can strain out the elder, bottle that up, and put it in the refrigerator. The tricky part is that you can bottle it up and leave it on the counter for a few hours. And the longer you leave it, the more bubbly it'll get. But if you let it get too bubbly, it will actually honestly explode. So I will tell you that last year I made 2 batches of elderflower soda. And 1 year I let them sit on the counter too long. I let them sit on the counter overnight. And I woke up to the sound of glass crashing in my kitchen. And I was like, oh, I wonder if my cat got up on the counter and knocked the dish over, and one of the elderflower soda bottles had exploded. So my advice is, if you're going to do it, probably do it inside of a cooler or a cardboard box, just so that if it does explode, it's contained. But also just, look this up. The other option too is if you can just leave the lid on loosely or burp it, every couple of hours, just burp it to make sure that the pressure doesn't build up. But then once you refrigerate it, you stop that process of fermentation. And that is actually how sodas were first made, not by like pushing carbon dioxide into the water in creating pressure, but the original soda was actually a product of fermentation. And it was a way to preserve a medicinal tea. So root beer, like when we think of like root beer, is actually like made from roots, often sassafras, sometimes also sarsaparilla. Sassafras being Sassafras albidum, native tree, sarsaparilla. In this case, it's a little bit debatable exactly what species is sarsaparilla, but we are talking about the smilax. Traditionally, sarsaparilla was like from Jamaica and Honduras were the better sarsaparillas, but you could use our local like greenbriers and catbriers. Far as everything that I've read, none of them are poisonous. Some of them might be better than others, but it's the smilax genus, but not. There's 2 kind of like categories of that genus. I don't know if subgenus is the right word there, but it's not the, what are those called? It's not the one that has a smooth stem. It's the one that actually does have thorns on it, which are the catbriers, greenbriers, and not the name of the other part. I just can't think of right now. I'll come back to that.
Carrion flowers?
Yes, thank you. Carrion flowers. Yeah. These like beautiful umbels, like spherical umbels, that flowers that turn into like these cute little berries. I know an herbalist up in Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, Andrew Bentley, and he uses one of the smilax genus. If you're curious, just ask in the Q&A and I'll look it up. And where I'm going to look it up is in my own book, because I don't have this whole thing memorized. I know, like I see you laughing. It's totally true. I just did this the other day. I was like, oh, what is the name of that? Oh, let me look it up in, oh yeah, in my book. Yeah. And it's there. So I memorize a lot of stuff, but I don't, still have to look things up. Sometimes in my own book. But he uses a few different species, and I can just tell you what that is, so you don't have to look it up in my book. I'll look it up for you. But he says that adding the sarsaparilla actually reduces the surface tension and makes it more bubbly. It tends to make it more, it changes the consistency a little bit and makes it more soda-like. So that's the original root beer, was you would make a tea out of sassafras and sarsaparilla, and then strain that out, add some sugar. And the sugar there was for the purpose of feeding the yeast, which would turn it into a fermentation, which you could then refrigerate. So instead of having to make that same tea day after day, you could just take a bottle out of the refrigerator or out of the icebox, or I don't know, back in the day, maybe the root cellar, and pop it open and drink that tea. So yeah, isn't that fascinating? Like soda started off as a health drink. It started off as a probiotic rich, because it was a fermentation product, way of preserving medicinal teas. And that's why we have birch beer, which was made from birch bark, and birch is an anti-inflammatory, and root beer made from medicinal roots. Sassafras and sarsaparilla, I should say, are still used as tonics in modern herbal medicine, and they're used for, and by tonics, I mean things that you take for a period of time that are gentle. They're not really treating disease, they're promoting health. The things you take over time to prevent yourself from getting sick. So they're thought to cleanse the blood, cleanse toxins out of the body. And sassafras also is the same family as cinnamon, Lauraceae, so it helps move blood. It's just a little bit of a circulatory stimulant, like cinnamon. So that's soda. Oh gosh, let's see. Elder, yeah, basically elder is a great antiviral. I tend to use it at the beginning of illness, either to prevent an illness or in the early stages. I don't think of it for like really bad illnesses where someone is like laid out. I kind of use it more early in the process. It's a fairly gentle antiviral, but strong enough to actually heal stuff. The elder flower is also makes you sweat. So one of the traditional ways, interestingly enough, in both European traditions, Asian traditions, and Native American traditions, is if someone has like a low-grade fever, like 99, 100, 101, a traditional thing to do is to drink, is to sweat it out. And a traditional way to sweat it out is to make like an old European tradition of is to sit in a hot bath and then drink a tea of elderflower, yarrow flowers, and peppermint. You drink that hot tea in the hot bath until you really start sweating, and then you like go to bed, you wrap yourself in like wool blankets and just pass out. And 9 times out of 10, people would wake up and the fever would be passed. I want to be clear too, if you want to try this yourself, it's not for like a high fever. It is really appropriate to use caution with high fevers because those can be dangerous. And I guess I should say, I'm not giving you medical advice. I'd still advise you to kind of go and do some research on this on your own, make sure it's the appropriate thing. But at least you know that this is something that people do. So now you can research it if you want to. All right, elder, amazing plant, so many uses. Let's talk about our next plant, blue vervain. This is verbena. I should say too that all these photos are mine. I love photography. So also photos from the book as well. So it's verbena hastata. And there is which is a native plant. It does grow somewhat in Tennessee, but what you might see more often is the verbena bonariensis, which is the Brazilian vervain, which is a cultivar that has now escaped and kind of like, gone wild. And that plant, it looks very similar to this. And that plant I haven't used it personally, but I've talked to other herbalists who've used it the same way as the blue vervain. I should point out that if you make a tea of this or a tincture being alcohol extract, it is extremely bitter. It is a very bitter plant, but it's also great for anxiety. Herbalists often use this plant for anxiety or for people who get angry easily. I really like it for migraine headaches. I like verbena. So this is not, just to be clear, it's not lemon verbena, which is a different genus. That's Aloysia. It's not actually a verbena genus. But the plants in the verbena genus I use for migraine headaches, for tension, like emotional tension, but kind of showing up in the body as like tight, tense muscles. Yeah, so blue vervain, great for that, as long as you can stand the flavor. But it is just a gorgeous plant. I grow it in my garden. I love seeing these flowers. Passion flower, Passiflora incarnata. So the funny thing about this plant is that when people first hear the name, they think, ooh, passion flower, is that an aphrodisiac? And it's not at all. It's the exact opposite. It is actually, it was named by the Jesuits because they saw in that God's beauty. So they named it after like the Passion of the Christ. And there's a whole metaphor that they use to, when Jesuits first encountered it in South America, to try to explain using the parts of the flower to explain Christianity to the native people. So that's where the name comes from. So it's that kind of passion. And Jesuits were not so much into aphrodisiacs, a little bit. So passion flower really is an amazing plant for the heart. And by that, I don't mean the physical heart. I really mean kind of like the emotional heart. Like I wouldn't use this for like heart disease is what I'm saying. It's a nervine. A nervine is an herb that's calming for the nervous system. So I use passion flower. This species in particular, this is not, so one of the common names for this is also maypop. So people also know this plant as maypop, passion flower, maypop, same plant. Because it has these yellow fruits that are edible. They're not nearly as tasty as the it's Passiflora edulis, the edible passion fruit, which is what they make passion fruit juice from, that beautiful purple, tasty purple fruit, purple juice made from a purple fruit. This is a yellow fruit. It's good if it's totally ripe. It's still pretty good. It's not, for a wild fruit, it's not bad. Let me just put it that way. The part we use for medicine, though, are the leaves and the flowers. It makes a nice tasting tea or a tincture, alcohol extract. You can also use it as a capsule if you're buying it. I don't like making capsules, it just takes too long. And what it's used for is to calm the nervous system. I find it great for anxiety. This is one of my favorite herbs for like in smaller doses. I might use it for anxiety, irritability, or I could, in large doses, I use it for insomnia. Like this is the herb that I actually have on my bedside table. So if I'm, I don't know, anxious or planning the next day, something big is coming up tomorrow, and I just can't get to sleep, tossing and turning, I'll like just take my bottle of passion flower. It's not passion flower, it just happens to be what I have. And I'll just like do like, that's a dropper full. Hopefully I don't get this on my computer. But that's about what I mean. When I say a dropper full, I mean like a squirt, whatever you can get when you squeeze this once. And I'll do about, stick my tongue out, just take 3 dropperfuls, and then I usually follow it with water. If you're taking, I'm really used to taking tinctures. I take tinctures over the tongue. I recommend to my clients to like pour just this much water and put the tincture into the water and drink it that way. So now you know how to take tinctures. But if you can take it just straight, goes into the system faster. I take 3 squirts, which is a lot. And that will calm my mind so I can go to sleep. So great herb for insomnia. It's a gorgeous plant and it looks like this otherworldly alien plant. But I've seen places, there's another plant that it does grow up in the mountains. I haven't seen it in the Smokies specifically, but I've seen it in some places in the Blue Ridge. but it's so much more common at lower elevation. Like in North Carolina, I see it way more commonly in the Piedmont. I've seen it in like upstate South Carolina. I would say this is probably most
Is
abundant.
that
Oh, sorry.
Somebody interrupted, but the passion flower is the native plant for Tennessee.
Oh, oh, nice. That's your native. That's like the official native plant of Tennessee.
Yes.
Nice. I love that. And you all might know more about where this grows than I do. I'm just saying this is like pretty abundant plant,
It is.
but not so much up in the mountains. It does exist in the mountains. It's just much more common at lower elevations, what I found. But yeah, great plant, really abundant. And I see there's like 19 in the chat box. So what else do we have left? Hawthorn, yarrow, wood betony. And we have, oh, that's the end. So I'm going to put up the yarrow, but I know we have, it's 8:35 and you said we go to like 8:40. Do you have anything in the chat box I should take a look at? And anything, yeah, any questions I can answer?
Well, let's see here.
And if not, I could say a short bit about yarrow.
Go ahead with
hawthorn.
yarrow and we'll get Bettina and I will start looking at the chat box.
Got it. Okay. So yarrow is an amazing plant. As I mentioned, the flowers can be used to sweat out a fever, usually along with elderflower. But this leaf is one of the best styptics. In other words, it helps stop bleeding topically. I've personally used this. I was out clearing brush, and actually I think it was a cat briar, just kind of gave me a good scratch right across the hand. And I noticed that I was bleeding, and I just walked out. What I love about yarrow, Achillea millefolium, is that it's really abundant in meadows, but it's also abundant in yards. So you see it in the wild, you'll see it gets cultivated, but the white flowered variety is the one that's medicinal. I don't think the yellow or pink ones are as medicinal, but maybe they might be for the styptic piece. But I just had yarrow growing wild in my yard. So I walked over to where I knew the yarrow plants were. I picked a couple of leaves, mashed it up, and just put it right on my hand. And by the time I got back indoors and took off the yarrow to assess the situation, the bleeding had actually stopped. So yeah, yarrow leaf, just a great first aid remedy to know. I actually have dried the leaves, powdered them up in a coffee grinder, and I keep them in a little jar downstairs in my apothecary, because sometimes I'm chopping up a whole bunch of plants. When you're doing that for like a few hours, there's a possibility you might get a cut. So it's good to have a styptic powder on hand. You can also use it internally, but I think that's, it's antiviral, it's a diuretic, it's, good for colds and flus, stimulates the liver, does so many things. I just have to stop in the hawthorn there. Just gonna pause there and see. Yeah, what questions are coming up?
There was a question about Queen Anne's lace. I know it's not a native, but I don't know about it as medicinal. One person, Bettina, said dried seeds are used by women for birth control. There appears to be a compound in them which blocks implantation of fertilized embryos.
Yes.
But the original questioner is interested in the inflammatory properties, anti-inflammatory properties.
Oh, the anti-inflammatory properties. I'm not as familiar with that. I know that it's used a lot in folk herbalism, but I mostly know about it as the seeds. It's the unripe seeds that are used. So of course, Queen Anne's lace is the carrot family, Apiaceae. So first off, I want to say, if you harvest these yourselves, be 100% that you're harvesting Queen Anne's lace and not poison hemlock or water hemlock, which to my eye look pretty different, but they're both umbels, similar looking leaves, and you do not want to make that mistake. It can be a very deadly mistake. For one thing, Queen Anne's lace, I'm going to tell you, look up the differences. To to be like 100% and just be like 100% sure of what you're harvesting. But Queen Anne's lace is fuzzy. The stems are fuzzy, the seeds. So another way to tell is that, so again, this is like a matter of life and death. So don't just, take my word for it, look this up. But what I find is that the Queen Anne's lace seed, like the flower opens up, and then when it goes to seed, it closes up like a bird's nest, and then it opens back up when the seeds are ripe. And I don't see the hemlocks doing that. So that's one way to tell. And the seeds are like really hairy on the outside, like stiff hairs, which I'm trying to like remember the seeds of poison hemlock and water hemlock, but I'm almost positive. So again, be sure to look this up on your own. Almost positive those are not hairy, that those are like have smooth seeds. So the seeds of Queen Anne's lace can be taken for 1 to 3 days, basically take it for 3 days after the possibility, like let's say like unprotected sex, to prevent implantation of a potentially fertilized embryo into the uterine wall. So basically it's like mildly irritates the uterine walls that preventing implantation. So it's like a form of natural birth control. I would say it's worth a shot. And like I've heard good results from it. I don't know that any type of birth control is 100%. So, just be careful. Do the research. The woman who has written the most about this is a woman from New York, Robin Rose Bennett. She's actually done several studies on it and has written extensively about exactly how to use it, how to prepare it, dosages. And so look up her articles on that. Robin, I can put that in the chat box too, her name. Robin Rose Bennett. I believe it's 2 T's, I'm not totally sure. Cool. Any other questions?
One comment, it says, we ate that type of passion fruit when I was growing up. We had no idea that it was good for us. It just tasted good, and my parents said it was safe.
Yeah.
Passion flower it's healthy.
It is. I like it. I didn't mean to put it down by saying like, oh, it's pretty good. It's not as tasty as like the official passion fruit. So different plant, different species, same genus. But yeah, and a lot, for some reason, when people eat the fruit, more often they're called May pops, which is funny. Around me, they don't come out in May. Maybe that's a name from further south, but they definitely do pop. Like I know a lot of kids who grew up around passion flower who would like, step on them and they go pop.
I've taught some of my young neighbors because I have a prolific amount of passion flower.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
And the girls have always had fun popping them. May pops.
This, by the way, this slide I have up here is a hawthorn. I put hawthorn as Crataegus, species plural, SPP, because Crataegus is a really challenging genus to key out to species. And also any of the hawthorns are good. The word haw is an old English word meaning hedge. So hawthorns have big thorns. They're native plants, kind of a weed tree. Actually, sorry, I don't mean to say they're a weed tree. What I mean is that they're not a weed tree. They're like a first succession plant. So they come in after a clearing. And why do so many thorny things like raspberry, blackberry, hawthorn come in after a place has been cleared? It's because it protects. The deer aren't going to eat a big thorny thing. Maybe you've had deer eat your trees, and so you know what can happen when like the rabbits and deer and other herbivores come in and they chomp. So hawthorns, black locust, raspberries, blackberries come in first, and they're these big thorns, and they create protections that then, after they get up, then the maples, oaks, tulip, poplars have a chance to actually get up to maturity. So that's kind of like the role of hawthorn in nature. They're often used as hedge plants because they're so thorny. Like the thorns are like acupuncture needles. They're like, they're big. You don't mess around with those. But yeah, so what do they say? Good fences make good neighbors. Good.
One
They might have been talking
question,
about hot farming.
and one question is Queen Anne's lace, how to harvest and use it.
Mm. Yeah, so specifically for like the contraceptive thing, the part used are I would say the unripe seeds. And again, Robin Rose Bennett's blog is probably a better way to like get a lot of information about that. And so I didn't prepare this plant, and I haven't actually used it in a while. But if I remember correctly, it's the seeds when they're like still kind of green. They haven't like totally gone completely brown as they do when they're fully ripe. And you eat about like a tablespoon of them twice a day for 3 days to prevent contraception. Wait, that's not the right word. To prevent implantation. The anti-inflammatory piece, I believe, is actually the flowers. The flowers are used in folk herbalism as a kidney tonic and for other things. But because I haven't used them, I don't know those medicinal uses off the top of my head.
Okay.
And I don't want to say something that could be wrong. But I know that something like Phyllis Light is an amazing herbalist. Phyllis D. Light is an herbalist in North Alabama, and she uses Queen Anne's lace flowers for the kidneys. So that might be a good resource to look up more about the flower use in folk herbalism, and Robin Rose Bennett more for like the seed use as a contraceptive. Queen Anne's lace is also known as wild carrot. It is actually the same species, not just the same genus, but the same actual species as our cultivated carrot, Daucus carota. But the roots of the Queen Anne's lace are white, and they're just not as, we've cultivated carrots to become orange and have more beta carotene. So it's funny, a lot of times the wild foods are more nutritious, except in this case where actually the sweet carrot that we've cultivated has more nutrition, more beta carotene than the wild version.
Tim asks, do you ever use American ginseng or golden seal?
I do. The golden seal that I use, just to be clear, these plants are getting picked out of the wild pretty quickly. I live in a place where, sorry, I'm just saying that I know this is being recorded, so I'm going to be careful about saying this, but I live in a place where, don't tell anyone, but I live in a place where there's ginseng growing wild on my land. And I know that there are people who I see on my road who are coming through with backpacks to go and poach ginseng. So it's really common, like around where I live, it is common people like poaching ginseng, either from the national forest or even from private land. In the Great Smokies National Park, the rangers have actually started like putting radio tags in some of the ginseng roots. And there's people who've like got, thousands of dollars of fines and maybe even jail time for like harvesting ginseng in the Great Smokies. Just to give you an idea why, like I actually buy the golden seal I buy is woods grown. Like I have a friend of mine who bought a bunch of seed, planted it, and then harvested it and like sold it fresh to me. But the American ginseng I buy is actually wild. Even though I discourage my students from harvesting it in the wild or buying it wild, but I buy from a friend of mine who actually lives in East Tennessee, harvests there, and he lives in the same land that his grandparents and great-grandparents used, and he harvests from the same. He was taught how to harvest ginseng from his grandfather. This is a long way of saying that don't use wild ginseng unless you know the source and you really trust them, because there's a lot of unethical harvesting of American ginseng. It's very expensive. Like I pay him $800 a pound, and that's kind of more on the cheap side. That's the less expensive side. So I do use it. Yeah, I love American ginseng. Before I found this guy who I knew would harvest it, I would just use woods grown or organically grown. A lot of people grow like woods simulated ginseng, where they would grow it they would plant it in their woods, wait 5 years, maybe 7 years, and then harvest the root and then sell it. And the trick with that is if you live in a place where ginseng is known to be, poachers might come and take it in that you have 5 years to like protect that plant. It is an issue out here in the Asheville area, Western North Carolina. I use it as a general tonic. I'm 53 now, and I want to like keep my health up. It's not something I advise like 20-year-olds to use, or maybe even 30-year-olds. But like as we age, like our energy gets a little bit lower, and so American ginseng, I use a very, very small amount of it. Like typically a tincture, I'll use like 30 to 60 drops is my average dose of the average tincture. The American ginseng, I take between 5 to 10 drops of the tincture in the morning. For me, I just do it before breakfast. And I just find it like it helps. It's not a stimulant. If you're stimulated by American ginseng, it's not the right herb, but it helps like nourish the chi. It helps kind of like nourish your energy. It's basically, it's like food for energy metabolism. I don't know, chipping on that word.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good, I find it to be a good medicine. And also just be careful where you harvest it from or who you buy it from.
Okay. Another question. What's an underrated or under talked about plant?
Ooh.
That kind of gives you a wide open question there.
It does. I'm going to go with mimosa because I mentioned that briefly before, but do you know mimosa trees? They just started blooming up here, maybe in the past week.
They're blooming here too.
Nice. It's a little bit confusing because the common name is mimosa, but there is a genus mimosa, and these are not in the genus mimosa. They're actually in the genus albizia. So I'll show you what the flower looks like. Oh, I'm on the very small screen, aren't I? Maybe this isn't the best way to do this then, but maybe it is because this is what it looks like. This is as small as it looks like when you see it on the roadside. You're driving by in your car and you see that like, well, boom. Let's see. And there's.
It kind of looks like a pink and white feathers on a tree.
Does. And this one is not translating to the small screen, but it's just a big tree with lots of. It's tripinate, has these individual like little leaflets. They're very small. I probably have a photo here somewhere. I could pull it up, but it's a great antidepressant. I mean, just looking at it is an antidepressant, but I think the flowers look like little like fairy paintbrushes. Once you recognize it, you just start seeing it everywhere. It is considered a weed tree. But I think of a weed as just a plant that is very enthusiastic and successful. That's my definition of a weed. People ask me, what is a weed? Like a weed is a plant you don't need to take care of. It just takes care of itself. It's a very successful and maybe sometimes enthusiastic, maybe sometimes overly enthusiastic plant. Right? A different way of looking at the word weed. But it's considered a weed tree. The flowers can be used. The bark can be used. The flowers are really uplifting. They're like really sweet and uplifting. They like raise up your energy. But raise up your energy, what I mean is that it gives you a feeling of being like a little bit giddy. That's what I mean. It's giddy, it's bubbly, it's fun. And the bark, I actually tend to use more in my clinical practice. The bark is really good at kind of getting in there and changing deep, dark depression. It's kind of often what I use the bark for. I even use it for like people with PTSD and trauma, people who are having like disturbed dreams at night, like they like wake up from disturbing dreams. Mimosa bark can be used for that. But it's also a gentle enough medicine. You don't need to have trauma to use mimosa. Like it's just a really like sweet plant. I know about it from Chinese medicine. It's an official medicine. I study a lot of Chinese medicine. I forgot to mention that part. I'm a Western herbalist, but I'm also trained in Chinese medicine. Mostly, I love Chinese medicine for the diagnostics, but some of those Chinese plants that grow here are incredibly useful. And the Chinese name of the mimosa bark is Hehuan Pi. That's like my take on the Mandarin. And it means collective happiness bark. So it's the tree of collective happiness. So who can go wrong with that?
Okay, I think I've gotten most of the questions. Excuse me. If anyone else has a question, just shout it out. Unmute yourself and ask the question directly. And if we're at the end of the questions, then let's see if anyone has anything.
So I have a question. Do you know of any medicinal uses for veratrum, the bunch flower? It's poisonous, but
Yeah.
I read in a book somewhere that it sounded like it might have been used in herbal medicine.
Yeah, there is a history of its use in herbal medicine. And so we're talking about Veratrum virid, the
Yeah,
false hellebore?
yeah, I think so. The most
Okay.
the one that I always knew is false hellebore. I know there's more than one, but it's probably the viridi.
Yeah, like which is interesting because I don't think it looks at all like helleborine. So it's like, why is it called that? I don't know. But,
Tina, repeat the name, please.
Oh, veratrum, veratrum.
Veratrum.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It
just typed
used to
that
be
in
in
the
the
top.
lily family, but it's now in the Melanthiaceae.
Why not?
And now the lily family has just been butchered lately. It's like,
Yeah.
I feel so bad for the lilies. Of course, it was a huge family. This is a plant I've actually heard of people mistaking for ramps when it first comes up.
Mhm.
So don't do that. And but once at this time of year, it's really obviously not ramps because it grows on this big stalk. It is not one that I would recommend using. I think it's just too toxic for modern use. I mean, I hear this from doctors all the time. People who are like anti-herbal medicine say this, but it is also true. So I think herbalists need to say this often is just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe, right? Cyanide is natural. So poison hemlock is natural. I would say this is a plant that don't use this. Do not use this plant for medicine. The historical use is that it was used for high blood pressure. It was used as a vascular sedative. So it would directly lower heart rate and reduce arterial tension and therefore lower blood pressure. But I think it's hard to get the right dose on that. So So I would not advise people use that, but it's interesting to look at from a historical perspective.
I think it may have some cardiac glycosides that could be similar to digitalis, which of course lowers the heart rate. So, so it may be something like that. I was just curious because I read it in a book somewhere and I was wondering what it was used for.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the indication would be like a full pounding pulse, like a very strong, because it does reduce that arterial tension. You want the pulse to be really strong and it'll reduce the force of the pulse, reduce the force of the heart a little bit.
Are there any other questions?
Hawthorne, by the way,
I'm sorry to harp on.
Oh, sorry. I just want to.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Anne Marie, go ahead.
You mentioned a name for the Queen Anne's lace, the middle initial D. I didn't catch that name though. I'm sorry.
Gotcha. I'll
put it in
the
your,
chat
I'll
box.
put it in the Daucus carota.
I got Robin Rose Bennett.
Oh, the woman. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, not the clinical name.
But whoever the name of the person who was using it for anti-inflammatory or not prevention of birth use.
Right. I
Oh,
typed
the
that.
Light. Her last name was Light.
I typed that in the chat box. Phyllis D. Light.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. I see it right now. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, great herbalist. And I just find she's someone who trained both with her grandfather, but also trained with Tommy Bass, who's a folk herbalist from North Alabama. And what I love about that is that she uses a lot of herbs that I did not learn in herb school. She uses herbs that's more like the folk use than the how to say book use. Us like book trained herbalists or herb school trained herbalists, it's like different than like the folk herbalist use sometimes. Sometimes there's a divide between like the folk herbalists and school herbalists. I really wish that there was more connection. I would love to know more people who are like folk herbalists who like just, know about this stuff because their aunt gave them herb tea when they grew up. But I find that it happens less and less. I mean, like that tradition is dying out. It's kind of sad.
Well, I think one of the problems is that, actually, if you look at folk herbalism, like Native American medicine, they actually did scientific studies on it. And because, now granted, it was kind of crude, but, you gave it to people and it either made them better or made them worse or they died. And so over time, they accumulated all that knowledge. And I think allopathic medicine, and maybe even, I think we've gotten away from, maybe it's just that we've gotten away from the land. So, but there shouldn't be a divide. I mean, if anything, because it's scientifically based, I think that the folk medicine and the ethnobotanical uses should be more important. I mean, they should be really looked at first, probably.
Right. I mean, I love looking at that and be like, okay, how has this plant historically been used?
Yeah.
That helps inform how I might use it now. Right. I love that.
But it was scientific, just not, in a lab.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was scientific because it was treating a good number of people over a long period of time. So that's also science. That's like
that is science.
Yeah. It's like just like a retrospective study.
I have one other question. What is your feeling about treating pregnant women with herbs?
Yeah, I'm fine with treating pregnant women with herbs, but you really do have to know what's contraindicated. In other words, there's some herbs you just don't give to women who are pregnant, and there's some herbs you can if you're cautious and you know what to look for, but that I wouldn't recommend people to. So, but a lot of times you can look online and see, oh, is this contraindicated in pregnancy? Generally speaking, things that affect the menstrual period are contraindicated during pregnancy. Things that are strong blood movers, things that really stir up the system. Traditionally, people also didn't use laxatives. And I don't know the science behind that. That's just energetic of, oh, you don't want to move things down and out. When someone's pregnant, you want to kind of keep things in. But people, it does stimulate the pelvic area to like move more. So generally you don't use strong laxatives during pregnancy. So certain categories that we avoid, but then you also might want to look up and just be sure that, and generally you're not going to use very strong herbs. You're not going to be using like poke root if someone's pregnant, or, but you could use gentle herbs, but just still using gentle herbs, look things up. Because gentle herbs, I mean, we use cooking herbs. That's what I think about. Like I'm not cautious if someone's pregnant, like, oh, are you sure you can have Indian food? Because that has like 12 different herbs in that dish, right? But, I mean, we get a little bit more in tea, obviously, than we would in, the amount of coriander in a chicken curry. But still, I think gentle herbs are generally okay, but it's still worth looking up and just making sure. Is that helpful? Okay.
Well, thank you, Corey. We much appreciate you joining us tonight. And
thank you for inviting
it's been
me.
interesting, and we appreciate it. Would you want to tell people where they can purchase your book? Is it available in bookstores?
It is. It's available. So my publicity. Whoops. Here, I'll stop the share the pause there.
Or if you could add a link.
That's from, yeah, that's kind of like why I stopped because I need to go and find the link. So it's available. It's funny, my publicist was like, available wherever books are sold. And I'm like, really? Anywhere books are sold? Maybe anywhere that most books are sold. I'm going to put you, I'm going to be a little self-promoting here and give you a link to my website, which has the, where you can buy this book directly from me if you'd like. And it's also available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. So just an independent booksellers. One of the things I like to recommend to people, here we go. It is on Amazon, definitely. And if you like it, you can do a review on Amazon, and that helps other people know what you enjoyed about it. It's actually really helpful for us authors. Because people wonder, like, oh, if I buy this book, like, how is it going to be helpful to me? What will I get out of this? So that can be helpful. Yeah, there's the link to like my thing, but I also recommend if for not my book, or I mean for my book or for other edits, I want to give you something like I'm just I have some issues with, I mean, I love that Amazon has my stuff. I can't find it, but there's a way to go to, there's a way to support your independent booksellers. I'm trying to find it here. I don't have the link off the top of my head. Oh, indie booksellers. Yeah. So you can buy a lot of books. If you want to support independent booksellers, but you don't want to like drive into town, you can go to like indiebooksellers.com and you can either buy it from your local bookstore or from some other, there we go. Cool. Oh yeah, there you go. Southeast Municipal Plans. So those are some good places to buy books. I also have been using Alibris a lot, which is www.alibris.com. I assume they have and that's what's cool about Alibris is you can buy stuff just directly from Alibris, but they also, any independent bookstore can just list their stuff on there. So you can buy from, and also they have both new books and used books. And some of those used books, they'll have it listed, are barely used. So you can buy used books at used book prices that look just like new books. And then it's cheaper than Amazon at that point.
And for those looking for the Tennessee Native Plant Society book on our natives, The Wildflowers of Tennessee, you can also buy that at most booksellers such as Barnes and Noble, Amazon. You can also get it at most of our park, the visitor centers, the bookstores, the gift shops at the parks throughout the state. So, and if you come to any event where we have a table, usually we will have books for sale. So,
I would flash the cover of that book, except it's in my car because I just use it that often.
Mine is so dearly loved that it's falling apart.
Oh, I'm on my second book already. My first book.
Yeah, we are too. My husband has one.
My first book fell apart, and now then I had to buy a new one, but it was out of print for a year there, and I couldn't buy a new one. I had to like wait till it came back into print and buy that again.
Much to our chagrin.
Publishers can be tricky. Like
they want to be out of the book before they make plans to actually republish it.
Right.
Which is terribly frustrating. And we're approaching that now.
Oh, good to know.
One remark to the Wildflower book. It has as many names and things in there, and it's hard to write on the paper. So I have an additional book whereby the pages then I have my remarks when and where I found that book, and might even have taken photographs of it, and so this way I know. Well, think I know most of the plants.
Well, good.
Nice.
There's about 800 of them in the
Nice.
book.
Wow.
800 pictures and 1,200 mentioned.
Oh,
Something
wow.
like that.
Yeah, because often under the name of one plant, to be like, oh, there's also these other species
Exactly.
that look different this way, but are less common in Tennessee. So we're just gonna like talk about this main species.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, it's really exciting. I've really enjoyed talking to y'all. I hope to, yeah. Maybe
We
I'll see
enjoyed
some-
having you. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming. And don't forget to send me that form,
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
please, Corey.
Yeah, I've got it filled out. I just have to like scan it in.
Thank you. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. For those that you know of that might have missed it, I will have this posted by the end of the week on our website on the seminars page. So everyone, thank you. CoreyPine, thank you. And it's always interesting to have people from other nearby areas to know about our plants. So thank you for coming.
Yeah.
And it's getting late, so I'm going to say goodnight to everyone.
Oh, yeah. I guess we're past time, aren't we? Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for having me here. Thanks to
Thank
the
you for
Tennessee
coming.
Native Plant Society. I appreciate it.
All right. Good
You know,
night, everyone.
Good night.